Aaron Cowan, Sage Dynamics, and this is my review of the Aimpoint Acro P1. I can't remember a time in recent history where there was more buzz and more anticipation for an optic coming to market. Aimpoint announced the Acro and everybody immediately loved it, even though very few people had it. People were already comparing it and saying it was the ultimate optic and it was better than everything else that was out there. And I think a lot of that has to do, I can almost guarantee, with a high degree of likelihood anyway, that has to do with the fact that Aimpoint has a very strong reputation for producing quote-unquote bomb-proof optics. I'm a huge Aimpoint believer. Going into the review, I wanted to be as objective as possible because this is their first dedicated attempt at a handgun optic. And that being said, their optics have been put on handguns in the past. In fact, almost as long as Aimpoint's been around, people have been putting their optics on handguns, and they do make some optics that are more hunting focused for hunting handguns. But for duty or self-defense carry, the Acro was it. Now there also exists an optic known as the Nano, which comes with the B&T USW, but that's not something I'm aware of that you can really get. So as far as handgun dedicated optics are concerned, the Acro was considered to be a solution to a problem that may or may not exist. Of course, that problem that we're talking about is an open emitter optic. A lot of the reflex optics out there, MRDSs that go onto handguns, almost all of them have open emitters. In fact, all the ones that are marketed pistol specific that I'm aware of have open emitters. Why is an open emitter a problem? Because water or moisture can get in there, can fog the lens of the emitter, can put water and refract the beam as it's projected onto the actual screen or window, if you will, of the optic itself. Whereas with the Acro, in unveiling and looking at the specifications of it, that isn't technically possible. So getting into the features of the Acro, it's an aluminum housed direct mount optic. It's designed, of course, for handguns. You've got 10 brightness settings on a 3.5 MOA dot. I would have liked to have seen them unveil it in 2 dot sizes. I'd like to have seen a smaller and a larger dot. But 3.5 is a really good size for handguns, and even though I would prefer a slightly smaller dot, that's my personal preference, 3.5 is a good size for general handgun purposes. It is powered by a CR1225 battery, which is a bit of a departure from what most red dot optics for handguns take, but that's not that big of a deal. It's not like the battery's hard to find or it's going to be more expensive because of that. Your battery life's going to be about 1.5 years quoted. If you turn the optic off, you turn the optic all the way down to the night vision settings, you may get a little bit longer than that, but of course good practice is replace that battery every year on your birthday. You shouldn't have any problems battery related. Of course, the big feature is the fact that it has an enclosed emitter and it is waterproof. Down to quoted 25 meters. Getting into the review, if you're not familiar with my review process, I'm doing a 2,000 round accelerated life cycle review. 2,000 rounds in the grand scheme of things is not a lot when looking at the life of an optic, but it's a good place to start. And my review process is intended to test the optic in all conditions it could be used in. I've become somewhat known for the way that I test my optics. Some people don't like my procedures, some people do. My personal feeling is I'm going to do it the way I'm doing it for every single optic. No optic gets preferential treatment. They all get the exact same treatment, the exact same round schedule until they break or until something happens. So for the purposes of this video, you're looking at the first 2,000 rounds of my normal process for evaluating an optic for data purposes. I like data. If you're not familiar, I have a living document. It's a white paper, which is mainly law enforcement focused. It's for, MRDS for duty use on handguns, but I regularly update that with round counts and testing of any optic that I'm testing on a handgun. So the 2,000 round review process is basically an evaluation, accelerated life cycle, to include multiple types of ammunition, multiple conditions, hot, cold, of course, a burn down, which I'll get to, and drop testing. Drop testing usually comes up as the biggest point of contention in my testing because some people feel like it's not scientific enough. Well, life's pretty random. I drop them from an anecdotal shoulder height, and that drop happens every 500 rounds. So in this 2,000 round review process, a video watching right now, it's going to get 4 good drops. The entirety of the 2,000 rounds, the Acro was mounted on an Agency Arms AOS system, which is a milled modular plate system offered by Agency Arms. They have a plate for the Acro that gives you irons. One problem that you're going to get from some aftermarket plates is they may not have room for iron sights. If you prefer your irons forward, the AOS plate is going to be able to give you that. Of course, that's not the only way you're going to be able to mount this. A lot of people are going to offer milling options. Glock has MOS plates coming if they're not already out. So you're going to have a lot of different ways to mount this optic. But for my purposes, I use the AOS because I believe it's the best modular milled system out there, and I got it the fastest. Very first thing I do with any optic is zero it. One thing I noticed during the zero process is the adjustments. They don't really have a very obvious or detectable, tactile, if you will, force to overcome clicks. So it doesn't feel like I'm getting a click, 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 click like I'm used to from other Aimpoint optics. So it kind of feels like I'm just turning a screw and I'm almost guessing. If you really bear down and pay attention, you can feel slight resistance in the turn as you go along, but it wasn't as pronounced as I would have liked it to have been. Not really a big deal. Zeroing the Arco was very straightforward. After the zero, the very first thing I'm going to do is that 500 round burn down. Now, during the burn down and throughout the video, I'm using four different types of ammunition during the review process. I'm using 115 grain, 124 grain. I'm also shooting 147 and 124 plus P gold dot. So I'm using duty ammo as well as traditional range target ammo. So for 2,000 rounds, 1,400 of that was range ammo, and then the other 600 was either 124 plus P or that 147 gold dot. So here's your burn down. So 500 rounds fired as fast as I could fire them. I do have an auto sear because I'm an FFL with an SOT, so I was able to fire those rounds pretty quickly. I got all 500 rounds done in about 3 minutes, which got the gun almost hot enough to where it was uncomfortable to hold. Luckily, as you'll notice, I had some pretty biblical rain there, so it was helping cool the gun down. You're going to fire 500 rounds through an optic anyway, but I like to do the burn down to accelerate, to increase the frequency of those rounds fired, to see if I notice initially any issues whatsoever. Burn down is usually one of the first things I do. Throughout the burn down, I didn't have any issues, no fading due to heat, no flickering, refresh rate was not noticeable. So the dot remained as clean and crisp from first round as it did to last round. And of course, what helped the optic really shine is the fact that it has an enclosed emitter. That torrential rain did cause any problems such as refraction or unnecessary or unexpected condensation or fogging with the optic itself. After the burn down, the very first drop test. Drop tests are done from shoulder height. I dropped the optic. Unfortunately, the range that I'm on now, the range that I'm currently using, does not have concrete, so I had to find a rock. With the first drop test done, I set about using the Acro in my normal training. Incorporated it into my daylight shooting, my practice, my low light, and of course my night vision. One thing I really like about the optic under night vision is the fact that it has night vision settings. The best way to shoot a handgun under night vision is with some type of MRDS, some type of RDS, and a distant second to that would be some sort of IR laser mounted to the handgun itself. I prefer optics. Because I have night vision settings, even with the 3.5 size dot, I'm able to turn it down into one of those 4 night vision settings, and I don't have extreme blooming or halo, so I don't have to rely on overcoming that blooming with an IR pistol light. If there's enough ambient lighting and I can see the dot and I can see my target and they contrast correctly because there's reduced halo because I have night vision settings, I consider that to be a huge win on the optic on that alone. Having dedicated night vision settings is definitely one of my favorite features going forward. Of course, night vision use of a handgun is kind of a niche. Under low light, brightness settings, even pushing 1,000 lumens out of a U-boat, different ambient conditions shooting it, I didn't experience any issues where I felt like I couldn't find the dot. You put it on the brightness setting you want, you leave it there. There is no auto adjust feature that you have to worry about or you have to overcome or you have to turn off. That manual adjustment gives me the brightness I want. Generally for everyday carry, I'm going to turn it all the way up and maybe come down 1 or 2 notches just to be sure. Of course, if you're going to start carrying a different optic, it's best to check definitively to make sure you know which setting is going to be best for all environments that you may find yourself in. But under low light, the optic performed as well as I'd expect it to. On the second drop test, there was an issue. So as you can see on drop test number 2, I broke the protective window and cracked the interior screen or glass or lens, if you will. So the optic is damaged. However, immediately, of course I do this after every drop test, I checked 0, 0 was maintained, the optic continued to work. Shooting it in adverse conditions, no condensation, no undue condensation, I could say, got inside the optic when shooting at night, because here in the south it does tend to get a little dewy, a little condensation-y at night. That didn't create any issues. I wasn't ever in a situation where the optic fogged to a point to where I couldn't see, because I've got that front protective window, that rear lens, the emitter is protected in there. So even with moisture being able to get inside the optic now, because that protective window and the lens is cracked, but it's not broken to a degree to where any excess amount of moisture is actually going to be able to access that chamber. The protective window is an awesome feature. My biggest concern with one-hand manipulations, this is something that you see a lot of people do. They'll use the optic body itself during one-handed shooting to manipulate the firearm. My personal feeling is if you're doing a reload or something like that, you don't need to, once you put the magazine in the gun, you don't need to rack the optic off of something in order to close the slide. You just use the slide release. That's what it's there for. You can use your thumb, use your index finger, left or right-handed, whatever. But people do use the optic to manipulate the gun off of objects for clearing malfunctions or for reloads for closing the slide, and that's fine. My personal feeling is do it if you have to. Don't make a habit out of it, because you are manipulating the gun off of the optic itself, which is actually your primary source of aiming. So you could potentially cause 0 issues if you've got a screw loose or you break something like that. Of course, that's getting into the possible things that could take place. But I did a lot of one-handed manipulations as part of my normal review process, one-handed manipulations as well as drop testing. After the lens cracked on that second drop, I went ahead and put another 500 rounds through it, did drop number 3, put another 500 rounds through it, did drop number 4. The protective window did not get damaged any more than it had been damaged on that second drop, and the crack did not grow larger in the actual lens itself. So I don't have a clean breakthrough into the internal chamber where that emitter is. The protective window definitely helps with those one-hand manipulations. The actual frame of the optic itself, or I should say the body of the optic, is pretty shallow there by the protective window. So by having that protective window there, it can keep objects from being introduced into the making contact with the actual optic lens inside. Another added benefit of that protective window is going to be if you do a lot of force on force, you're worried about UTM striking your optics. That protective window, that sacrificial lens, if you will, is going to go pretty far towards protecting your internal lens. Something that's been coming up with the Acro since it was released or announced or shown to the general public was its boxiness. People call it ugly. Whatever. I don't care what it looks like. And again, it's on a Glock, which is square. And this is square. People call it a mailbox. They say it's big. That's kind of a, I guess, like an optical illusion, because it's a complete uninterrupted from lens to rear, roughly the same height. You take an RMR, you take a delta point. If you had, they presented in the same way. If they had enclosed emitters, there wouldn't be a significant size difference. You can find the measurements online, the difference between the RMR, the delta point, and the Acro. It's not really that big of a deal. Now, concealed carry is a concern that people had. They're worried that the optic is going to cause their gun to print more. I can't speak for hip concealed carry because I don't carry there anymore, haven't for years, but for appendix carry, I didn't find it to be a problem at all. Remember, the optic still sits below the highest point of the gun, which is the very bottom of your mag well. So it's going to have, if your shirt line is going to fall, the biggest point it's going to catch just with concealed carry is going to be right here. Yes, you can have an interruption of your clean, smooth shirt presentation on the optic itself. I didn't have any problems with button-ups. I didn't have any problems with t-shirts. It's not really that big of an issue. The optic is not significantly large enough to create concealment issues. Now, of course, the caveat to that is if you wear skinny guy tight t-shirts, then you're probably printing anyway. So you're not really going to have to dramatically change your garments. It's not really going to be that big of a deal. For duty carry, Safariland is still the best holster out there for RDSs. I use it in my DO holster and my RDS holster. Both holsters accommodate the optic very, very well. The RDS holster, unfortunately, that rear hood does not completely close over the optic, but that hood is there primarily for optics that don't have enclosed emitters, so it's not really that big of a deal. So after 2,000 rounds, how do I feel about the optic? I don't feel like it gives me any necessarily specific advantage for acquiring the dot versus what I've already been using, which is traditional open emitters such as the RMR or the delta point. I don't feel like the body of the optic lends itself any more effectively towards dot acquisition than what I was already using, which is something that some people have created, it's almost like a hypothesis, maybe that tubular design, or the fact that it's you're going to be looking through a little bit of tunnel, you can see the sides of the optic window. It's going to help you pick up the dot or acquire the dot a little bit more efficient. Acquiring the dot has nothing to do with the gun itself. It's all about how you actually view the target and how you work your eye-hand coordination to correct and adjust the situation, and where you actually, your proprioception, where you put your hands. That's my opinion. I don't feel like this provides a significant advantage for me for dot acquisition as to shorten the learning curve for someone who's new to red dots. But that's just me, and I've been shooting red dots for a long time, so I don't have dot acquisition problems anymore. So that, again, I'm just speaking from my personal experience. I can see how some people may feel it would be advantageous, and that's fine. Is it the best red dot optic out there? I think that it's got some significant advantages over the competition, and those advantages cannot be dismissed. The enclosed emitter, while fogging and condensation and the emitter being blocked is a small concern, it is still a concern. If you're carrying concealed against the body, your emitter's probably not going to fog up, because your emitter's constantly next to your body heat. So even if you're getting out of a car, out of an air-conditioned car in Florida, your emitter probably will not fog. It can, but it probably won't. Now, if you're in duty carry, law enforcement, and it's carried in a duty holster, that window fogging, that window condensate, those are very real concerns that have to be addressed. And for law enforcement purposes, having an enclosed emitter is a huge win. Now, yes, I was able to break the protective window, and yes, I was able to crack the glass. But one thing we haven't talked about is that after all those 4 drop tests, did the optic lose 0? So after 2,000 rounds, 4 shoulder height drop tests on a rock, because again, I don't have access to concrete, the Acro is performing as well as I would expect as a product from Aimpoint. So came into it, with a healthy degree of suspicion, and the fact that it's a brand new optic right out the gate. Are there some things I don't like about it? Yes, there are. Still, even with that protective window, I'd like to see a little bit more of a standoff between the body and that protective window. Just a little bit more, not much, maybe a millimeter. I'll take it if I can get it. The size of the optic doesn't bother me at all. I'd like for the adjustments to have a more firm or more specific or more detectable force to overcome clicks, if you will, as I'm adjusting and zeroing the optic. But that's pretty much it. Those are really my only 2 nitpicky things that I can focus on. Would I carry this optic? Absolutely. Would I use this optic on duty? Absolutely. Is it the greatest MRDS? I think that remains to be seen. 2,000 rounds is a lot of ammunition, and I have accelerated their life cycle, but I'm not done yet. I'm going to continue to use this optic until I'm satisfied that it's going to last the lifetime of the firearm and the lifetime of the owner, or until I'm able to actually break it using the same exact standardized testing procedure. So this 2,000 rounds is just the beginning. I'm going to put another 8,000 rounds through it as quickly as possible, so I can get that number count up there high enough so people can make a more informed decision if they're relying on me for their purchases. So for the 2,000 round review process, it definitely passed. Yeah, I've got some lemon damage, the protective window's broken, the lens is cracked, the optic maintains 0, no undue condensation being introduced into it. It still functions in every condition I would need to use it in. So in a duty situation, if my optic took a hard impact from a door frame or getting out of a police vehicle, or the gun got dropped from a shoulder height, or what have you, the optic would still maintain 0, still be usable in that moment and whatever moments came after that until you were able to replace it and get it serviced. I'm a big fan of the Acro. I will be getting a few more of these, but this specific one, we're going to take the round count of 10,000 as quickly as we can. But as far as the 2,000 round review process goes, it passed, definitely passed, and I'm very pleased with the performance, the features, and the price. I'm Aaron Cowan with Sage Dynamics. Train accordingly.